Is it Judge Cato or Cato?
Judge Cato.
Cato.
Thank you.
Judge. You're going to be on Southern District in New York, if confirmed. Is that right?
Central District of California.
Central District. I thought there were two of you that were going to be on the Southern District in New York. No? Okay. All right. Can you tell me what the Fourth Amendment is and the rule of search and seizure and what the exceptions are?
Thank you for that question, Senator. The Fourth Amendment prohibits search or seizure without a warrant.
Uh-huh. And the exceptions to it?
The exceptions are quite numerous, so I certainly wouldn't be able to give
couple.
Border search, exigent circumstances. Off the top of my head, I can't give you the full list, but there are quite a few.
Okay. Suppose California said, look, we appreciate the guidance of the U.S. Supreme Court on the warrant requirement and the exceptions, but we're not going to follow the exceptions here in California. If you want to arrest somebody, you better have a warrant. Can California do that?
Senator, it would be contrary to the Code of Canon, specifically Code of Conduct, specifically Canon 3, for me to give an opinion on a hypothetical like that.
Come on, Judge. Don't dodge my question. This is really basic constitutional law. Can California decide it's not going to follow the exceptions to the warrant requirement?
Certainly, Senator, if California decided to do that, I would imagine it would be an issue that would be litigated.
I would imagine too, but who's going to win if they litigate it?
Well, Senator, the first issue would be that pursuant to the Pullman abstention doctrine, that would be the type of issue that a federal court would defer to the state to allow the state to decide in the first instance whether or not it could perhaps be resolved.
Suppose the state did it. This is what I'm getting to. Suppose that California said, we appreciate it, Supreme Court. I'm way over. I'm sorry. You need to look that up. Okay, it's pretty basic.
Judge Cotto, I want to start with you. Is racial discrimination wrong?
Senator, our Constitution prohibits race discrimination on the basis of race.
Okay, let me ask again, is racial discrimination wrong?
Senator, as a judge, I don't deal with issues of morality or whether something...
So you have no views on whether it's right or wrong?
Senator, because that is an issue that is frequently litigated before the courts, pursuant to Canon 3 of the Code of Conduct.
Okay, so why does the Constitution prohibit racial discrimination?
Senator, I think it's part of our Constitution and this nation's history of aiming for equal justice and treating people, regardless of any protected class status, equally and fairly.
So discriminating based on race violates, I think you just said, our Constitution's history of aiming for justice. Is that a fair characterization?
Senator, our case law, if you're talking about race discrimination under the law, yes, pursuant to Supreme Court precedent, race discrimination under the law is prohibited.
So you and I are both graduates of the Harvard Law School. We were there at the same time. I don't think we crossed.
We did not.
As you know, our alma mater is currently before the Supreme Court for its longstanding practice of discriminating against Asian Americans. And many top universities across the country have vicious discrimination policies against Asian Americans. They are reminiscent of the quotas against Jews that we saw these same schools impose in the 1950s. These schools believe that Asian Americans have been too successful academically, and that if they allow students to compete based on merit, they'd have too many Asian Americans. And accordingly, Harvard and Yale and a number of other top schools in this country explicitly and brazenly discriminate against Asian Americans. Does that practice concern you?
Senator Cruz, as you know, the Supreme Court recently granted cert in the case to which I think you're referring.
Yes.
And therefore, pursuant again to Canon 3, I am
Okay, so you're going to decline to comment, so let's not talk about that case, but let's talk about what you've written. You know, I have to say I was astonished. Senator Grassley asked you about this article you wrote in law school, and your response was, well, gosh, I haven't read that. In my experience, when people are nominated to be a judge, they do some preparation. Did you not reread it in preparation, or did the Biden team tell you don't read it because you don't want to answer questions about it?
Senator, I read it, but again, the question that Senator Grassley...
Okay, good. So you read it, so let's talk about it. I've read it sitting here, and I find it stunning. Look, there is a pattern of this administration nominating political activists and radicals to the bench, and they've done it for a year. And it's highly concerning. So I'm looking at what you wrote, your words. You described, quote, the Reagan presidency represented the pinnacle of the counteroffensive launched by the guardians of the status quo. In the face of institutional resistance, activist movements redirected their focus from liberation to survival. Do you believe there was a threat to the survival of Asian American groups under President Reagan?
Senator Cruz, again, that was a law review, book review.
I'm just asking if you agree with the sentiment. You wrote it.
Senator, I don't recall.
Do you agree with it now?
What we were thinking.
Do you agree with the sentiment now? Not what you were thinking then. I'm not asking your state of mind then. I'm saying, do you agree with the words you wrote?
Senator, again, I don't know what our purpose...
I don't want your purpose then. Today, as you listen to the words you wrote, do you agree with them, or do you think I was wrong?
Senator, without the complete context...
Okay, let's read a little bit more then. You talk about the neoconservative view, and here's what you define an Asian neoconservative. As someone with an opposition to racism, so that's good, but a commitment to ending affirmative action programs. And you write, quote, the neoconservatives' narrow vision of success currently threatens to impose divisions within the Asian American community and among different ethnic groups. Emphasizing personal achievement and success as measured by the status quo, the Asian American neoconservative fails to acknowledge the shared history of oppression and then ties their individual success to the survival and liberation of all oppressed peoples. Judge Cotto, as I read this, what you're saying, and if you will permit me to use a more common vernacular, you're saying that to be sufficiently woke, an Asian American must support policies that discriminate against Asian Americans. I got to tell you, that doesn't make sense. Is my reading of what you wrote incorrect?
Senator Cruz, again, we are talking about something that I wrote when I think I was a 23-year-old
But do you agree with it
student.
today? I'm not asking what you thought then. I'm saying today, as you sit here, as the Senate is considering you for a lifetime appointment as a judge, do you agree with what you wrote that Asian Americans, to be sufficiently liberated, must support discrimination against Asian Americans?
Senator, without the complete context of that particular quote that you've excised,
I read it to you.
I cannot give you whether my opinion today, whether or not I agree with what I said as a 23-year-old law student. I would have to review the entirety.
But you said you did review it before this hearing, right?
Senator,
Correct?
I reviewed it briefly. This was quite some time ago, over 25 years.
It's a very short article. It's about 6 pages.
I co-wrote it with a classmate of mine.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees on your nominations. Thanks for being here. Ms. Cotto, let me start with you, if I could. Judge Cotto, you were quoted in a 2002 LA Weekly article, and I've got it here, about an effort by federal law enforcement officials right after 9/11 to prosecute individuals who had fraudulently obtained security clearances at airports. The article says that at the time, 563 people had been arrested in this particular government prosecution effort. Many of them were illegal immigrants, and they'd been charged with a number of crimes, including false presentation of a Social Security number, false use of Social Security cards, falsely claiming to be a U.S. citizen. You said in the article, this is why you appeared in it, something that I find peculiar, and I want to give you a chance to explain it. You say these are people who haven't done anything wrong. And then you go on to say that they are people who, in the government's mind, are just throwaways. So we're in the midst of, it's no secret, we're in the midst of a very significant crime wave in this country, assaults, homicides, you name it. Unfortunately, we've seen it in my home state of Missouri. So I'm really concerned about crime. And I'm concerned about what this administration is and is not doing to combat crime. The answer is they're not doing really anything of any import. And obviously, I'm concerned about what you would do on the bench in this regard. So let me just ask you, do you still think that people who have committed crimes, like the 563 folks here, references this article, do you still think that that's doing nothing wrong? Help me understand what you meant by that.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. You're correct. I was involved in that case, I think, over 20 years ago when I was appointed to represent individuals when I was a deputy federal public defender. In that role, my role was to do what I did for all of my clients, which was to put aside any personal opinions I might have about what they were accused of, to zealously advocate on their behalf, and to ensure that their Sixth Amendment rights were fulfilled. And that was what I was doing. In terms of the case itself, I do want to point out that in the Central District of California, the number of cases involved in that operation was somewhere around 100, a little bit over 100, maybe 107. And as a result of the advocacy from the Public Defender's Office, as well as other community organizations, we were able to convince the U.S. Attorney's Office to offer misdemeanor dispositions for the majority of those cases, dismissals in some of the cases. And so while I'm in no way, minimizing the seriousness of it, I do believe that as a result of zealous advocacy, the U.S. Attorney's Office